Welcome to Boring Tales, where we tell the most boring stories you'll ever love. Tonight's tale drifts back through time, to the quiet heart of ancient Rome. Not to the emperors or the battles or the roaring of colosseums, but to the quiet world of Lucus. A humble mosaic maker. He does not chase glory. He does not hurry. He rises with the light, and places each tiny stone, one by one. In his workshop, time slows. Patterns take shape with gentle hands, and the days pass not in noise, but in quiet steps, warm tea, and the soft click of tesserae pressed into mortar. So settle in, breathe gently, and drift back with us, into the slow and steady rhythm of Lucus, the Mosaic Maker. The day began, as it often did, in silence. Lucus stirred beneath his worn linen blanket, the edges curled slightly where the sun had faded them over many seasons. The cot beneath him creaked, not from age, but from the reliable way it greeted the weight of his frame each morning. His legs slid slowly over the edge, toes meeting the cool, worn stone of the floor. It was smoother now than it had been years ago, polished not by tools, but by the patient repetition of daily footsteps. His own. He sat there for a time. Not thinking. Not deciding. Just breathing. The small window above his workbench glowed with the faintest suggestion of morning, amber seeping through in thin streams. Dust hung in the air, visible only in that angle of light, motionless and content. Lucus did not rush toward the day. He stood slowly, bones unfolding like the unfurling of a scroll long stored. His robe, hung from the same peg since winter, waited without urgency. He slipped it over his shoulders and tied the cord loosely. He crossed to the shutters. They were wooden, old, with hinges that required coaxing. His hand, broad and lined with mortar memories, rested on the handle. He paused. And then, with quiet ceremony, he opened the shutters. Light came in, not suddenly, not harshly, but in layers. First the gold. Then the soft pinks and quiet blues of early sky. Then the garden sounds, birds arranging their day, leaves nodding in the morning breeze, and the distant rush of someone brushing a step clean. The workshop breathed, stretching its corners, waking with him. The mosaic pieces on the far table caught a glint of sunlight. Red stone. Pale ivory. A fragment of deep lapis glimmered like a still eye. Lucus did not speak. There was no need. The room already understood the day had begun. He walked to the basin by the wall and dipped his hands into the water he had set aside the night before. Coolness met skin. He washed without splashing, letting the water trickle down his wrists, into the stone groove below. Drying his hands on the same cloth he'd used for years, Lucas turned to face his tools. The day ahead would be slow. As always. But here, in this first quiet moment, everything was in balance. The room, the light, the weight of the robe on his shoulders. The silence that settled between the wooden beams above. The tiles, waiting. He stood for a moment longer. Before moving toward the teapot resting near the hearth, its clay body still warm from the night's fire, and its purpose, like his, simple and steady. The water in the kettle was still cool. Lucas lifted it with both hands, careful not to clink it against the stone hearth. The clay felt smooth beneath his fingers. Familiar. Gently worn from years of morning rituals. He placed the pot beside the fire pit, where the last of the night's embers rested beneath a thin veil of ash. A pale, whispering gray that shifted ever so slightly when he breathed near it. He crouched. Slowly. Reaching for the flat iron rod that leaned quietly against the wall. With small, steady movements. He nudged the coals. They didn't flare. They didn't hiss. They responded like old friends, glowing. Barely. Remembering their warmth. He did not stir them more than was needed. Just enough to coax a whisper of heat into the base of the kettle. Then. He waited. He remained still beside the hearth, knees bent, arms resting on his thighs. Eyes on the faintest shimmer beginning to rise above the clay pot. He didn't need to watch it. But he did. Not out of worry. but because it was enough to simply watch water begin to warm. Eventually, after many long breaths, steam began to rise. He stood, slowly, allowing each joint and tendon to extend at its own pace. There was no rush. No one waited on him. Nothing demanded anything of him. The world outside the workshop might have been noisy or full. But here, there was only this. Lucus walked to the narrow shelf above his workbench, his bare feet making the softest contact with the stone floor. The shelf, like everything else in his space, held only what was needed. A tin of dried chamomile, sealed with a waxed lid. A small bundle of fennel seeds wrapped in old linen. A few loose bay leaves tucked behind a pottery shard. He selected the chamomile. Opened it slowly. Breathed in the faded floral scent of last spring's harvest. He measured the crushed flowers with his fingers. Not for precision, but by feel. And dropped them gently into the cup. The cup itself was chipped on one side. Slightly stained from hundreds of uses. But Lucas liked it that way. The flaws made it familiar. Trustworthy. When the water was ready, he poured it carefully. Slowly. Over the flowers. The sound was quiet, but unmistakable. A soft stream meeting dry herbs. A hush of warmth settling into clay. He left it to steep. And while the scent began to rise, he turned, cup in hand, and walked toward the far end of the workshop. To where the sunlight now fell in wide, golden bands across the floor. There, beneath the window ledge, lay the first mosaic he ever made in this room. He had worked on it long ago, in the quiet season between contracts. The pattern was simple, gentle curves of ochre and slate blue, flowing like waves, each line echoing the one before it. A sea of stone, frozen beneath the weight of years. Lucas knelt beside it. His knees met the floor without sound, without protest. He rested one hand on the smooth tile, ran his fingers across the cool surface, and let his gaze wander over the arcs and lines he had placed so long ago. The colors had dulled, slightly. The mortar between the tesserae had settled into thin, hairline fractures. But it held. Only one piece, near the corner, had begun to lift. Just a little. Barely enough to catch the edge of a cloth when he swept. He pressed his thumb against it, slowly. Feeling it resist, then yield, then settle again into place. He did not repair it. Not yet. Not today. He sipped his tea, which had cooled just enough to drink. And he stayed there, beside the mosaic, sipping, breathing, gazing. The steam curled upward, caught the light, and disappeared. A single bird called out from beyond the shutters. Once. Then again. Then no more. Lucas leaned against the wall and let his eyes follow the edges of his work. The way one line touched another. How the darker stones balanced the lighter. How the floor told no story. And yet, said everything. The cup grew lighter in his hand. He drank the last sip, and sat quietly, as the sun continued to rise, stone by stone, across the floor. The cup was empty now, but Lucas still held it, letting the cool of the clay settle into his fingers. As he stood again, and turned toward the low workbench near the rear wall. The tools were waiting, exactly where he had left them yesterday. Not one had moved. Not one had wandered. They waited in stillness, just as he did. He set the cup down with care. On the soft cloth he used for drying brushes. Its slight weight made no sound. He ran his hand across the wooden surface of the bench. Rough in some places, smooth in others, and lightly dusted from crushed stone and sand. First, the brushes. They lay in a carved wooden tray. Short ones with stiff bristles for dry dust. Longer ones for sweeping grit from between the tesserae. Each brush had a handle rubbed smooth by years of use. And Lucas chose them not by size, but by feel. He lifted one, twirled it gently between his fingers, then set it aside. He chose another. Then another. 3 would be enough for today. Next. The pebbles. He walked slowly to the tall jar by the window. A heavy, earthen vessel that held what he called river sleepstones. Small, oval pebbles collected from the edge of a slow-moving stream. Outside the city, he had sorted them by color, and today he would need the pale ones, the soft whites and gentle grays. He reached into the jar, his hand sinking slowly beneath the pebbles, and pulled out a small handful. They made a soft clicking sound, like gentle rain on a tiled roof, as he laid them out onto a folded cloth. Next. The tesserae. The tiny cut stones sat in a shallow wooden drawer, sorted not by hue, but by shape and edge. Lucus didn't always work in color. Today's pattern would be quiet, shaped more by shadow than by shade. He selected pieces carefully, one by one, laying them in rows as if lining up words in a forgotten language. Each one was a little different. Some chipped, some perfect, some shaped oddly by time or tool. And finally, the lime. A small ceramic bowl sat near the floor, its surface dusted with a fine, pale layer, powdered lime, sifted twice, waiting to be mixed into the mortar that would hold the stones in place. Stone by stone, hour by hour, Lucus lifted it with both hands. Slowly, carefully, as though it was something precious. He placed it near the bench, beside a second bowl, already filled with sifted sand. Everything was ready now. Not for a rush of activity, but for the slow unfolding of quiet, thoughtful work. He stood there for a while, just looking at the objects he had gathered. Their shapes, their textures, their quiet usefulness. They did not speak. They did not shine. But they were perfect. In their silence, Lucus exhaled through his nose, long and low, and finally sat down on his stool. The tools were ready. The light was good. And the day was still very young. The day was still quiet. And Lucus had not yet spoken a word. He didn't need to. Everything in his workshop understood silence, and moved by it, and settled deeper into it. The light now reached across the floor, touching the lower edge of the supply shelves, shelves carved by hand. Years ago. From wood that no longer remembered what it was like to grow. Lucus rose slowly from his stool, his robe brushing gently against the bench behind him, and turned to the long stone table where the color jars sat. Each jar, each small clay pot, held tesserae sorted by shade. No labels, no names, only memory, and time, and a kind of quiet friendship between maker and material. He reached for the first jar, a heavy pot filled with ochre stones. Warm, earthy, sun-worn. He lifted the lid, careful not to let it scrape. Inside, the stones gleamed faintly in the angled light, a sea of golden brown and dusty orange, like baked clay beneath a fading sky. He reached in, fingertips brushing the stones, selecting one, then another, turning them slowly in his palm. He looked not only at color, but at the tone beneath it, the memory each piece carried. One stone had a streak of gray through it. He set it aside. Another was richer, deep, almost red. He turned it once, twice, then laid it down on the cloth near his bench. Next came the lapis. The jar was smaller, heavier, cooler to the touch. It had a small crack down one side, sealed with beeswax and linen string. He had repaired it long ago, and it had asked for nothing more since. When he opened it, the scent was faintly metallic, stone and dust, held together by time. The tesserae inside were deep blue, the color of river shadows at dusk. Not many, just enough. He took 3, carefully, turning each one beneath the light to catch its true shade. One had a fleck of white in the corner, a bright speck, like a star caught in twilight. He placed that one nearest his hand, knowing he might use it for the center of something small and special. Then, the chalk whites. The softest color of all. Not pure white, but muted. Worn by wind, by water, by years of handling and waiting. Lucus opened the final jar with both hands, as if lifting the lid from something sacred. Inside, stones like ancient bone, like bleached shells, like the breath between words. He took a handful and let them spill slowly into a shallow bowl. The sound they made was almost nothing. A hush of stone upon stone. He paused then, stepped back, let his eyes wander over the colors he had gathered. The way ochre warmed the blue, how chalk white calmed the dark. He did not choose quickly. He did not build today's palette in haste. He simply stood there, among the colors of the earth, and waited until the arrangement felt right. Outside, a breeze passed by the open shutter, rustling a fig leaf somewhere just beyond the wall. Lucus did not look up. The palette was chosen, but the stones were not yet ready. Lucus returned to his bench with the bowls of color in hand. Ochre, lapis, chalk white. And laid them gently, side by side, on the wide cloth that lined the table. Each bowl rested quietly, settling into its place as if it knew exactly where it belonged. Now came the sorting. Not by shade, but by feel. Lucus drew the ochre bowl nearer, and dipped 2 fingers in. Lifting the first small handful, a collection of jagged fragments and soft-edged chips, each one no larger than the tip of his thumb. He held them in his palm, closed his hand around them gently, and listened. The stones whispered as they touched. A faint, rattling hush, like small voices murmuring in sleep. He opened his hand again, and began to sort them. One by one. He placed the smoother pieces in a shallow tray on the left, the ones worn gently by years in the jar, or polished accidentally by the touch of passing hands. The rougher stones, those with sharper angles or uneven faces, he placed in the tray on the right. He moved slowly, steadily, letting the sensation of each piece guide the decision. Some had a flatness that would sit well in the mosaic. Some had a curve that would catch too much shadow. Some were perfectly imperfect, and those, he set aside in a small dish of their own. Those were the maybe stones. Lucus always kept a dish for those. The ones that didn't quite fit, but might. He worked without hurry. There was no time to beat. Only stones, and his hands, and the space between choices. After the ochre came the lapis. He poured the blue tesserae onto the cloth, where they scattered like a stilled river. Deep, dark, quiet. He touched them with the edge of his thumb, testing their smoothness. Looking not just at shape, but at how they felt against skin. Some stones spoke immediately, as if they knew exactly where they wished to be placed. Others waited, said nothing, and he let them be. Lucus did not rush them. They had waited longer than he had. And lastly, the chalk white. These were light in the hand, featherweight compared to the others. Softened by years. Some chipped, some perfect, some with the faintest shadows etched across their pale faces. He laid them out gently, like tiny bones in a quiet graveyard, making sure not to disturb the stillness that seemed to cling to them. For each stone, Lucus gave a moment. No decision was made in haste. There was no urgency here. Only care. Only patience. Only the rhythm of choosing. The trays slowly filled, one with smooth stones, ready to be set. One with rougher pieces, waiting to be trimmed or filed. And one with the maybes. The in-between. The ones that needed time. Lucus stepped back, and exhaled slowly through his nose. The sorting was done. But the day was only just beginning. The trays were full. But Lucus didn't begin placing stones into mortar. Not yet. First, he arranged them. Not in the design itself, that would come later, but in rows and clusters, just to see them better. to let them breathe in the light, to let their colors speak softly to one another before being fixed in place. He moved slowly along the bench, carrying the tray of smooth ochre stones to the wide wooden table near the window. This table, his laying table, was older than the others. Its surface was scarred with tool marks, lines drawn and erased, patches of faded dye from old projects. But Lucus loved it most. The morning sun was now fully across the floor, stretching in through the open shutter at just the right angle, catching the edge of every stone and casting long, pale shadows across the cloth that covered the wood. He took the stones and placed them down, one by one, in neat, deliberate lines. First the ochre. Warm. Comforting. Arranged from darkest to lightest. Some were almost terracotta. Some nearly yellow. Some glowed like sand at dusk. He left space between them. He always left space. Next. The lapis. He brought the blues in a shallow clay dish, tilted it carefully, and let the stones spill into a gentle curve across the cloth. No sorting yet. Just watching. How the light caught their edges. How the specks of white shimmered and then faded again. Lucus leaned closer. Eyes tracing the curve. Adjusting only 2 stones that had landed too close. The rest he left untouched. He moved then to the chalk-white tray. The lightest of the stones. So quiet in color they were almost invisible against the cloth. He laid them down slowly, forming a loose spiral, a shape that had no end. Some stones were nearly round. Some triangular. Some cracked down one side, but still beautiful in their wear. Lucus tilted his head to one side. And then to the other. The spiral seemed balanced. Or at least, balanced enough. He stepped back. Folded his arms loosely. And stared at the entire arrangement. 3 clusters. 3 quiet palettes. 3 textures of stillness. For a long time. He didn't move. He let the light touch the stones. He let the shadows shift. He listened to the faint creak of the wood beneath the bench, the occasional stir of wind outside the shutter, the far-off call of a street vendor, barely heard through stone and dust. He didn't rush to begin. Lucus believed that the stones needed to be seen before they were used. That each one had to feel welcome before being pressed into place. He would not work against them. He would wait until one of them asked to be first. And so he stood in the soft Roman light, among the silence, among the stones, surrounded by the stillness of a day that did not ask for more than his quiet attention. The air was warm now. And the colors were ready. The stones were ready. But the surface was not. Lucus turned from the light, walking slowly across the room to a wide, shallow slab resting on a raised platform of brick and wood. This was his tracing surface, flat, level, cool to the touch. Its edges rounded by time and use. He brushed his hand across it, feeling the thin layer of fine clay he had spread the day before. Now dry at the edges, but still soft enough at the center to take a mark. But it needed smoothing. Lucus knelt, his knees touching the ground with a soft thud of cloth over stone. He picked up a small wooden trowel, its handle darkened from years of oil and handwork, and began the quiet ritual of evening the surface. With slow, careful motions, he dragged the trowel in long arcs across the clay, pressing just enough to flatten, but never to scrape. Each pass left behind a faint sheen. A wide, calm stroke. As if the clay itself was exhaling. When he was finished, he set the tool aside, rested his hands on his thighs, and looked down at the now smoothed surface. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It was ready. In the same way Lucus was ready, not flawless, but present. He rose again. Slowly. And walked to the far shelf where his marking tools were kept. 3 chalks, each a different color. 1 white. For outlining the basic shape. 1 pale red. For interior curves and division lines. 1 soft gray. For shading and subtle flourishes only he would see. He lifted each one and rolled it between his fingers. But first, They needed sharpening. Lucas reached for the small blade kept in the dish beside the tools. It was old, not sharp enough to cut flesh, but still able to carve down the soft stone of the chalk with ease. He took the white one first, held it steady in his left hand, and with slow, scraping motions, he pared it down, turning it gently until the point was clean, angled just enough to make a smooth line across clay. Tiny flakes of white fell to the cloth in soft spirals, like powdered bone, or the quiet remains of forgotten whispers. He did the same with the red, then the grey. Each chalk, freshly sharpened, each edge crisp, but not sharp. He laid them beside the clay slab, lined them up like resting birds, and stood for a moment in the quiet. No wind now. No voices. Just the faint warmth of morning filling the workshop like still water in a basin. Lucas exhaled through his nose, and placed his fingertips lightly on the edge of the slab. The drawing would begin soon. But not with haste. Not with pressure. Only when the hand felt ready. Only when the lines felt real before they were drawn. The tools were waiting. And so was he. Lucas stood, his hands hovering above the soft, smooth clay. The chalks rested beside him, waiting, like birds on a branch. Still. Silent. Patient. He didn't reach for them just yet. Instead, he leaned forward, bracing himself gently against the edge of the slab, and let his eyes drift over the surface. He imagined the lines before drawing them. He let the shapes appear first in the space behind his eyes. A spiral, perhaps, or a gentle wave. Repeating. A border of soft curves echoing the rhythm of footsteps on a quiet road. Nothing elaborate. Nothing that demanded attention. Only something balanced. And still. He reached for the white chalk first. Lifted it carefully between thumb and forefinger. And brought it to the clay. The first mark was not a line, but a dot. A center. A place to begin. And from that point, he drew outward, slow, arcing motions, one breath for every curve, his wrist barely moving, his fingers guiding the chalk in a smooth, steady glide. The chalk left behind a soft, pale trail. Not sharp. Not bold. Just enough to guide the stones when the time came. He drew the outer edge first, a loose oval. Imperfect by design. Softer than a circle, wider than a coil. He paused. Leaned back. Examined it from the side. It was enough. He took the pale red chalk next, the one for lines within lines. Details, subdivisions, the quiet rhythms hidden inside the whole. With this, he marked faint curves inside the oval. Nothing rigid. Just arcs. Gentle turns like the ripple of cloth in a breeze. Some were long. Some shorter. Some barely visible, drawn with the lightest touch, as though the chalk were unsure whether it was meant to leave a mark at all. Lucas liked it that way. Marks that were barely there. Marks that whispered. He paused again. Traced one of the curves with the tip of his finger. The clay was still cool. Still soft. Still listening. Finally, he took the grey chalk, the one he used rarely, but always with care. He leaned close now. His face just inches from the slab. His breath slowing. And with the gentlest of pressure, he added soft shading to the places where curves met. Where one shape melted into the next. Where a line became something less certain. He worked quietly. Pausing often. Wiping a fingertip gently to blur a line. Then returning, softening, settling. The drawing was not a plan. It was not final. It would be changed as he worked. But it gave the stones a place to arrive. And that, he believed, was enough. When he was finished, he set the chalks down and stood once more. Rolling his shoulders, stretching his hands, and letting his eyes follow the soft curve he had made across the slab. There was no rush. The day was long. The pattern was beginning. And all around him, the workshop rested, in the same quiet, as the lines he had drawn. The light had shifted slightly, falling lower on the tracing table now. casting soft shadows that curved along the edge of the slab. Lucus noticed, but did not move. The lines were drawn, but the pattern was not yet clear. Sometimes, to move forward, he looked back. He turned slowly, his sandals brushing the stone floor with the faintest of sighs, and crossed to the wall where a wooden shelf held a row of scrolls, loosely rolled, tied with strips of dyed linen. They were old, creased at the edges, frayed at the seams, but treasured. Each scroll held a pattern from a mosaic long finished. Some made for villas. Some for baths. Some never used, only dreamed. Lucus reached for one near the end, a pale blue ribbon marked with a faded charcoal line. He untied it slowly, the linen falling soft into his palm. Then he carried it to the low workbench by the shuttered window, laying it out as carefully as a sleeping child. The scroll opened in silence, its surface worn smooth from years of unrolling. Inside, a wave motif, soft and simple, curving like the tide against a tiled shore. Lucus smiled. He remembered the room it was made for. A villa near the coast, a cool atrium where the sea breeze slipped in through tall columns and the light danced on white walls. He remembered sitting just like this, drawing slowly, just as he had today. The wave was a favorite, because it never ended. Even when the mosaic stopped, the curve seemed to continue beyond the edge, as if it had always been there and always would be. He traced it now with his finger. Not to copy, but to remember the rhythm. The rise and fall. The soft, rounded peaks. The quiet energy of movement held still in stone. Lucus rolled the scroll a little farther, revealing the border design, tiny interlocked circles, like linked hands. Or clouds in a procession. He'd forgotten that detail. He studied it a moment longer, then slowly rolled the scroll closed, tying it again with care, and returning it to its place. He chose another. This one, a more intricate pattern. Stars within stars, triangles folded upon themselves, a design that once filled the apse of a temple with silent geometry. It was beautiful, but too busy for today. Lucus let it rest. And then another, this time a leaf motif, vine-like, with soft tendrils winding toward nothing in particular. That one felt closer. Closer to the feeling in his chest. The way the morning had moved. Slow. Quiet. Purposeful, but never in a straight line. He didn't trace it. He didn't take notes. He simply looked. Not searching for answers, just returning to something known. After a long while, he rolled the scrolls back, tucked them onto the shelf, and turned again to the tracing table. The pattern on the clay was his own. But it hummed now with something older, something remembered. Lucus rested his hand on the edge. And closed his eyes. The day was waiting. And soon, the stones would find their place. That was another quiet moment. In the slow, uneventful day of Lucus. The light continues to shift, the patterns slowly take shape, and the hours drift onward, as gently as dust in a sunbeam. If your eyes are still open, we'll ease into the next part. Right after this breath.